I think the number one is around acceptance of who your family is. I think that is a really key thing. This is our family. This is what we look like. This is what we do. And how can you make space for acceptance within yourself of what your family looks like? And I think the other really key thing is preparation. Get ahead of the game. Don't have that kind of surprise, that overwhelm on Christmas Day. Really kind of plan for how that's going to look like for you and your family to make it as smooth as possible.
Welcome to the Choice Based podcast. I'm Dr. Lee David, a GP, CBT therapist and author. Today, we're talking about how to navigate family Christmas. Christmas can be a time of joy and togetherness, but for many families, especially neurodivergent families, it can also bring sensory overload, disrupted routines, and the strain of change and expectation. The combination of noise, lights, social demands, can be exhausting, leaving little space to rest or recharge. Old family roles and stories can also resurface, adding emotional weight to an already demanding time. But there are ways to move through this season with greater balance, creating space for calm, connection, and meaning in whatever form works best for us as a unique family. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Lucy Rigley, a clinical psychologist and specialist in neurodivergence and family wellbeing. We'll be exploring how families can navigate the festive season with understanding and flexibility, recognising sensory and emotional needs, setting healthy boundaries, and creating traditions that work well for everyone. Lucy, welcome. Could you start by introducing yourself and share what drew you to focus your work on supporting neurodivergent families?
Thanks so much for having me here today, Lee. I'm Lucy. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've been working in this space since 2013. Throughout my career, I've worked across children's mental health services, and that started to get me really interested in neurodivergence. Did we call it that back then? That kind of terminology has developed over time. But I've been really privileged to work with children and their families, and then adults who are neurodivergent. I think what drew me to work in this area was having space to celebrate people's differences. I know that there are lots of difficulties and challenges that come with being neurodivergent, but there are also lots of strengths and things to celebrate too. And being alongside adults, children, and families on that journey is an absolute privilege for me.
I love that. And I really like the idea of celebrating difference. And I do feel that that is something that can come out around Christmas, because there are lots of ideas about how it's supposed to be. And yet actually how that might look and how that might work for different individuals really can vary. And so it is about celebrating the differences and finding our unique way to focus that. So it feels like a really great conversation we're going to be having today, Lucy. Christmas is so often portrayed as joyful and fun, and yet it can often be overwhelming for many families, and I think particularly for neurodivergent families. From your perspective, what tends to make this time of year such a challenge?
Gosh, it's just so hard, isn't it? Like, I think for all families, there is so much expectation around Christmas. If you're a family that celebrates Christmas, you spend all year thinking we're coming together for this special time. It's really magical, but actually often doesn't live up to the expectations that we have in our head. So I think that's true for all families. But then for neurodivergent families, I think there are extra challenges on that. So like you said at the top of the show, around kind of sensory differences, but other things as well, like routine disruptions. There's lots of people coming in and out of your space during that time, which can feel hugely disruptive. And I think, there's lots of surprises around Christmas time, which can feel really dysregulating for people when they need that predictability. So I think it's often this kind of combination of things that come together that just make things a little bit too overwhelming for everyone. And we see people crashing, burning out, becoming overwhelmed, and not having a safe space to go for that.
Right. So it sounds like there's a lot of competing pressures that we need to be aware of that can really create challenge. But perhaps if we are aware of them, there are ways that we can mitigate, there are ways that we can make Christmas more workable for unique families. So let's maybe start with sensory changes. You mentioned that, which I think is a really big one. Can you talk a little bit about some of the sensory challenges that people might experience at Christmas?
Absolutely, yeah. I think often when we talk about sensory challenges, people kind of go to the obvious ones that everyone knows, maybe about kind of sound. Lots of the people that I meet, whether that is, parents or the school teacher, will talk about sensitivity to sound. But not every neurodivergent person has a sensitivity to sound. Some people might need a lot of noise input to help them to regulate. So I guess it's thinking about the whole range of differences in terms of sensory needs. So we're thinking about things like the sense of vision. So at Christmas time, we have a lot of visual input coming in. We've got bright lights, we've got flashing lights, we've got big adverts, bright adverts being shown to us all the time. So we've got a lot of visual input there. So thinking about what's coming into all of the senses, not just one of those senses. Christmas time, there can be lots of foods being cooked. You might go to a Christmas market that might have, really strong smells. You might be cooking a Christmas dinner that isn't maybe something that you usually cook in your house. And that unusual smell can be really overwhelming and hard for people to deal with. There might not be a space to go and escape from that. So if you are out and about, there might not be a safe space to go. But also if you've got people within your home, maybe your bedroom has been turned into somewhere for granny to sleep during the Christmas period. And so you haven't got that space to go and escape from this sensory experience. I also think one of the senses that we don't often talk about is our interoceptive system, so what's going on inside of us. And we know that a lot of neurodivergent people can have differences in the way they process interoceptively. So thinking about, they might not have that understanding that they might be hungry or full, that they're too hot or too cold. And so actually being able to support people to think about what's going on inside of them, as well as maybe the more kind of external things that we can see, is hugely important all the time, but especially at this time of year.
So it sounds like the first step is awareness, to know your triggers, to recognize. And those triggers obviously may well vary across a family. So a family is not just one person. We have a group of individuals who may all have different triggers, different sensory sensitivities. And you mentioned about other wider family members who may come and visit, and perhaps they may bring their own sensitivities or their expectations, or they may also bring perhaps less awareness or tolerance of routines that we have established within our family unit that do work for us as a family. And that can create conflict as well, can't it?
Yeah, I think that adds to that thing you were saying earlier about kind of this coming together of like a combination of factors. And it is really hard to hold that flexibility in mind for everyone's needs during that period. Perhaps you're a family unit of usually 3, 4, 5, 6 people, and then we add other family members in who have different needs. How do you manage all of those together? Whose needs do get met and don't get met? Who's the priority? And also as a parent, how do you advocate for your child's needs when perhaps, you might have your own parents coming in that maybe weren't able to tolerate your own differences when you were growing up, to then be able to advocate for your own child's needs. That can bring, other feelings into that as well. But I think it's really key to plan ahead, identify what those triggers are, and then think about how we can adapt things to meet everyone's needs within that.
So some proactive planning and not getting overwhelmed on the day sounds really key, to be aware of, actually, this is going to be a problem because we know that noise or smells are likely to impact, or perhaps the overwhelm of lots of different people, which is a change for the routine. And so we do need to be aware of what's likely to be problematic, and also bring that awareness to those relationships. And I think they can be really, really important, because we've often grown up in families ourselves. We may have had, as you described, our own challenges at times, and how they were met in our original families. It may be that our parents weren't necessarily as accepting. Perhaps there was less known about neurodivergence. And so how we're held within the family unit, how we view ourselves. There's a whole lot of old stories about how we see ourselves, roles, all of that stuff can churn up, and it can really contribute to heightened emotions at Christmas, can't it?
Yeah, I was really thinking about that when I was thinking about what we might talk about today, Lee. And definitely for me, that idea of, we all have different roles in families. So, you might have had the role in your family growing up as being the angry one, or the loud one, or the difficult one. And often when families get back together, people fall into those roles, often not consciously, or might be pushed back into those roles by the person who put them in that role in the first place. And so not only are you trying to manage what's going on for your child, but also what's going on for you in that moment. And we know that it's almost impossible to co-regulate with our child when we're not regulated ourselves. So I absolutely think that planning ahead, both for yourself and for the wider family, is really key. And thinking about, can we have these conversations now, ahead of Christmas? So perhaps it would be a good idea to have some planning time before Christmas to get those things in place, so that you're not arriving at the day, you're feeling overwhelmed, and then you're trying to have those conversations. We know that when people feel threatened, that fight or flight state, it's much more likely to be a difficult conversation than if we're in a different place and we can have that conversation, I guess, in a more relaxed, not completely relaxed, but more relaxed way.
Yeah, that sounds really important. And what's coming to me as you're talking is also, you mentioned how co-regulation is such an important part of navigating this complexity where there is going to be higher levels of emotion, almost certainly. And so it strikes me that really, as the adult, if we're able to find ways to support ourselves and manage our own well-being, that will actually have a really significant impact on the whole family. And so as a parent, it's completely legitimate and actually very important to take some time to think about, what do I need? How do I look after myself through this period? What are my challenges going to be? Because parents will often think about their kids. They're really focused on well-being and they might ignore our own personal needs. What do you think, Lucy?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And most of the parents that I meet in my therapy room have exactly that dilemma. I think it's a very common experience in parenting, isn't it, to wash your needs to one side, because there is only so much capacity, right, to do stuff to support people. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the phrase self-care, because I feel like it puts a lot of responsibility on the individual when perhaps they don't have anything left in terms of, space or capacity to care for themselves. So we need to find ways, perhaps as a family unit, of supporting each other. So, if you do live in a two-parent household, what can you delegate to the other parent so that you do have a little bit of space for that self-care? If your child finishes school before Christmas, is there someone around, a family member, a friend, who can provide a little bit of childcare, like heading up to that Christmas period, so that you can, as a parent, get some space to do a little bit of self-care? We need the system around us in order for us to be able to do that. So I think it's really key, but I think it's really, really tricky for parents to do. And I'm really keen not to place the blame back on the parents for that.
So looking after ourselves at Christmas isn't about, well, you just need to stay calm and relaxed and you're responsible for everyone's emotions, as much as what can I put in place that really will support me genuinely? What practical, emotional, environmental supports can I put in place that will actually make all of our lives a bit easier? And taking the pressure off me will probably ease it off everyone else. But I completely agree. There is a risk that then we feel that responsibility. I have to be something in order to support everyone else. So it feels like a balance. I think it's also important, though, that we don't think I just need to focus on everyone else and I don't matter, because I do think there is a tendency for parents to sometimes just squash their needs. So it's that balance, isn't it?
Yeah. And they'll seep out somewhere. If we don't make space for those feelings, they will find a way out, whether we like it or not. And it might be really basic things. I think people think of self-care as being this huge act of, I need to find, I don't know, 2 hours to go and have a massage, which would be beautiful, right? But sometimes it can be as simple as, I think of it like being your future friend. Like, what would you in 2 days' time, in a week's time, in a month's time need from you? What can you do now that the future you will thank you for? So might that be like, if you are the person that's doing the cooking of the Christmas dinner and you are absolutely from ragged, can you buy things that are ready chopped, ready made? Can you get yourself some snacks in that you really like, so that you're not feeling really hungry when you're doing that? Are there little things that you can do that the future you is going to thank you for?
I love that. And so it's making choices to our future self, but it doesn't have to be too far in the future. I like the idea of 2 weeks or 3 weeks in the future, that self and me going, well, thank you, Lee. I'm so glad you provided these snacks that I really like whilst I'm cooking, or something like that. That sounds really nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Many neurodivergent families bring a complex range of differences. And that's one of the wonderful things that creates the diverse society and families that we live in. If we think about families that may include perhaps people with different neurodivergent needs. So perhaps we have a family member who has ADHD, there may be an autistic family member, there may also be other neurodivergent characteristics as well. How do we try and understand and balance? Because those needs might be quite different. You might have somebody who really enjoys variety, who likes newness, who likes the excitement of change, and then somebody else who really likes routine and stability and struggles a lot with change. And so it feels like that can be challenging. What's your experience? What have you noticed in that? And then how can we start to think about it?
Yeah, it is really, really tricky. I have been having more conversations with people about this in the last few weeks. People are thinking about that build-up of kind of coming together a little bit more. And I guess that awareness within families that there are these different needs and how do they pull that together. And often families have really good intentions. We want to meet everyone's needs and then feel quite stuck when that can't happen. So I guess it's thinking about creatively about how you can do that. So if you have a child who really wants that kind of excitement and newness, how can you pull that together? So they want to go to this place that your other child can't manage or you can't manage as a parent because you more than likely might be neurodivergent yourself, right? So is there someone else within the family or someone else within the wider network that can do that? Is there a friend at your child's school who is going to that thing that your child really wants to go to that your other child just couldn't manage that they could go along with? So thinking creatively about your wider network of who can support with that. And thinking about, is there different zones in your house that you can create this difference in? So if you have a child that wants a lot of the Christmas decorations, that wants a lot of difference, wants a lot of kind of sensory input, can you have a space in your house that is for that and a space in your house that isn't for that? Like, how can you meet everyone's needs within that? And also thinking about how you talk to your wider family about that. So whether that is if your children are able to cognitively able to understand that, like, can you speak to them about, your brother needs this and you need that. So I'm going to do this in here for you and this in here for that so that they can all understand why they're all having their needs met in different ways. Because I think that can often be a difficulty, that kind of sense of injustice of they're getting that and I'm not getting that and that's not fair. So how can you talk to them about understanding each other's needs and how you are trying to support them to meet those needs?
So it's something about creating a family culture where recognizing people's needs and doing what we can to meet them where's realistic feels important. And that's an open culture that everyone can join in with. So we can all share that, even if we're not able to engage in certain things because we find it too hard, but we can still join in with the idea that we care about each other's needs and we will do our best to try and support that. And so I think those conversations are really powerful. And we can lead them as the adult. But I really agree that bringing others along and actually involving the kids in understanding and contributing their own ideas, because they might actually have some really creative suggestions about what might work.
Yeah, I often think that that's one of the first things that I always say to families that I work with. Like, have you tried asking them yourself? Because I think often we underestimate, our children's ability to know what they need. If they don't always know what they need, we might need to offer suggestions sometimes, but I always encourage people to go in with that because often they will. And they might come up with some really creative ideas that our adult brains just haven't thought of. But it might be that if one child really wants to think about Santa coming and bringing the presents to their home, that might be really overwhelming for another child because it might be someone's coming into the house, that might be dangerous, that might be unpredictable. So how can you create this story together of how Santa might come and bring you presents in different ways?
Yeah, so it's a lot of listening and creativity and perhaps not being tied into the big should about how Christmas should look, because I feel like those shoulds are a big heavy weight that many of us actually carry. And it is exacerbated by perhaps social media, by seeing what others theoretically are doing. I think the reality is that for many people, Christmas can be actually quite a challenging time of year. And the images of being all happy, I'm sure there is lots of fun, but I think there's also, it comes with highs and lows. And that's probably more normal than thinking it's all just fun without difficulty. So what's your understanding of some of the shoulds around Christmas and how can we tackle those?
Gosh, it's so tricky, isn't it? And I think the world that we live in now, it's even more than it ever has been before, right? We only have to open up our phone and we are flooded with these images of happy family Christmas pictures, all in matching pajamas or huge piles of presents that perhaps might not be able to afford, or our children might not want lots of surprises and lots of presents.
This is the Choice Pause, a short 2 to 3 minute tool you'll hear in every episode. Each time with something different to help you pause, notice, and choose your next step. These tools are drawn from my books and online courses, and you'll find links in the show notes. Today's pause is finding calm in the chaos. You might use this when everything is feeling loud, busy, or unpredictable. When the day is moving faster than you can keep up with. Take a steady breath in and a longer breath out. Let go of any tension in your shoulders or jaw. Take a moment to ground yourself in the present moment. We're going to use a short pause to help ground ourselves and create some stability by connecting with the present moment. Look around and notice one colour you can see. Maybe it's a green mug or a blue curtain. Notice a sound you can hear in the background, perhaps the quietest noise. Become aware of something you can touch or feel. Perhaps your feet on the ground, or the weight of your body where you sit, or the cool, smooth glass in your hands as you take a sip of water. Take another slow breath in and exhale gently with a long sigh. As you breathe out, count as high as feels comfortable. Repeat this a few times if you need to, allowing your body to begin to settle. Now ask yourself, what small choice could help me move through the day with just a little more ease? Maybe it's taking 5 minutes to step outside, making a drink, or simply pausing before moving on to the next task in your busy day. Take one final slow breath and carry that sense of calm and awareness into whatever comes next today.
It can be really, really easy to make those comparisons and think that other family are doing better than me, or they're having more fun than I am, or it's easier for them than it is for me. That might well be true, but often information, the images that we're flooded with are not an accurate representation of what was going on to people behind closed doors. And so I always encourage people with kind of that flooding of information from social media to mute things that don't align with you, that don't make you happy, that aren't adding anything, contributing anything positive to your life. If all you're doing is making those comparisons and feeling rubbish about yourself, you don't have to have that information in your life. Find people who are similar to you. I always remember when I had my child and I had difficulties with my transition to parenthood, and I remember my health visitor saying to me, you need to find other people like you. And I did that, and it helped me massively because other people who were having the same experiences I had made me feel less of a rubbish parent, less like I was the only one that was having a hard time with this particular aspect of parenting. And I think this is really true for people in this Christmas period. If all you're flooded with is images of other neurotypical families that don't have those extra challenges that you do, and they can go to that Christmas light show and have all these wonderful surprises and go and see Santa, and your family just couldn't manage that, that's not the kind of thing that you want to be flooding your brain with. Find people who are like you, and it will make you feel a whole lot more accepting of yourself and your family.
Yeah, find your tribe, right? Find the people that when you connect with them, you feel slightly more uplifted, you feel more nourished and more positive, rather than a little bit depleted and more self-critical of ourselves. And actually, when we really notice what impact does this relationship have on me, whether it's through social media or even face-to-face relationships, it's really helpful to just recognize, do I need to create some distance between this particular group or individual? And actually, can I lean into others who actually, when I'm in contact with them, I just feel a bit happier. I feel more able to be myself. I can just relax. I think that's so important. I was just sort of smiling to myself, thinking about, the matching pajamas, which is becoming a big thing. And I think you could have a family where maybe one or more family members are desperate to have this beautiful matching pajamas. And then there may be somebody else who's perhaps demand avoidant, who absolutely will not wear those pajamas and in fact would be wearing the opposite. Maybe they want to wear a fancy dress outfit specifically because they don't want to do what everyone else is doing. And I think there's something really celebratory about that maybe having that photo with that person being themselves, that individual not wearing the pajamas. I think we could really celebrate that as an image as well as Christmas, rather than thinking the better image will be the one where we all look exactly the same.
Yeah, just you saying that, then that felt really heartwarming. It almost felt like something I could see like on a billboard of this is what families look like at Christmas, right? We don't all have to stand there in the nice fancy matching pajamas. We can celebrate the difference within our family and just how beautiful it would be to see those images rather than the ones that we're seeing right now.
Exactly. There might be somebody who's not even in the room. There might be somebody who's refusing to be on the camera. There might be somebody who's like got a mask on. And I think we just need to make space for that and actually find the joy in it, because we are who we are, aren't we? We can't be other to ourselves. It's like an authenticity thing where we just lean into these are our individuals. We can also hold a value of understanding different needs and maybe being accepting and looking for ways that meet everyone's different needs. And sometimes there's a leaning into, well, we're just going to go with what is and just roll with it, really. Take the pressure
Yeah,
off.
yeah, yeah. Your family isn't going to be a different family just because it's the festive period. Your family is the same family it was last week and the week before and the week before that. And whatever that looks like the rest of the year, how can you make a space for you to continue to be that family at Christmas? It doesn't mean that you love the child less that's not in the family photo. It means that you are allowing them to be who they are and knowing that when you look back at that, they were getting their needs met in another way off that camera, and that will be a lovely memory to have.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And so maybe some of that disappointment is back to the idea of should. So a good Christmas means that we should all celebrate in the same way, versus what Christmas means for us is that we have the autonomy to be able to celebrate in the way that works for us as individuals. And we'll do our best to try and connect through that, because for most families, connection is a big piece of Christmas. For me, that's what Christmas represents most importantly, is finding connection and finding relationships, whatever that complexity involves, but actually finding ways to connect with the people in our lives that matter most to us.
Yeah, it's about that togetherness, isn't it? And what does togetherness look like for your family? It might not mean you all coming together because that might be too much for you. Like, how can you have that in a different way? How does it work for your family? What does that look like? And some of the ideas of togetherness, I was just thinking as you were talking then, one of the key images in my head about togetherness at Christmas is everyone sitting down around the table and having that Christmas dinner together. But actually, that might not work because you might have children who have ARFID, you might have children who have sensory differences with their eating, you might have a child who can't sit down and eat in front of other people because of other needs. And so what does that togetherness look like for your family? Can you make space for that to be how you need it to be?
Yeah, so Christmas dinner might look like, for one child, it might be that they have their standard meal that they have every day. Maybe they can't eat it in the same room as others, but maybe there's a way to find some connection in another way, and also honor their autonomy and their choice to say, I'm not yet ready to be able to have sensory overload by being asked to participate in a way that I just can't do yet.
Yeah, yeah. And meeting them where they're at. If Auntie's idea is that you should sit down and have this Christmas dinner together and your child can't do that, why can't Auntie go and play the video game with your child that makes them really happy and connect in that way? We expect children to change their behavior to meet adults' needs, but can we change our behavior as adults to meet children's needs?
Theoretically, as adults, we may have more flexibility in how we can understand and approach situations. So actually, as adults, we probably do have more resources to be able to flex. And we need to let go of the shoulds and come back to, how do I connect with my grandchild, for example, in a way that feels meaningful for both of us? And that's a much more creative question than, why can't they come and sit and have dinner with us? The other kids are here. Why can't this one child sit and join us? And let go of that idea and actually think, well, I'd love to connect. I love my grandchildren and I would love to find a way to be able to connect. So what would that look like?
Yeah, yeah. Definitely shifting our perspective as adults within that system to meet the child where they're at. And I think a lot of adults can have a real difficulty with that because they have lots of shoulds because of their own upbringing. We should sit together to eat, or it's rude not to do that. And actually, can we just take a step back and look at where that idea has come from? if that's an idea that we want to hold on to, and what difficulty it might create if we hold on to that idea so strongly that it then doesn't allow that connection that is a really strong value within that family, for example.
Yeah. And I wonder if it helps to try, if we are an adult and we're, say, inviting our parents or other family members into our home, or we're going to visit at Christmas, those conversations, it probably helps to try and manage conflict in the
Mhm.
conversations. And for me, I would often encourage people to focus on the needs. So if you have someone says, well, why can't they just come and join us for Christmas? That's what they should do. Then rather than saying, well, they can't, why can't you see that? I've told you this before, which just creates a conflict
Mhm.
situation, then sometimes it helps to say, I really hear that what you want is for us to have a connected Christmas and for us to spend time together. And I agree, that is really important. We all want to be able to connect. We also have to understand that there are other needs that the children have as well. And so we're doing our best to try and balance all of those things. And so our decision is that we're not going to ask our youngest child to come and join us for Christmas dinner, but we're going to make sure that connection can happen in other ways. And so
Mhm.
it sort of takes the tone down. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about how to approach those very difficult conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way of saying it, Lee, because it takes off the pressure off that individual or that individual child, and it takes it back to what is important for us together. So I definitely think taking it not being personal about you or that other person, being able to take a step back and see what is this about? What are we trying to create here? And different people communicate in different ways. Some people having that kind of verbal interaction face to face might create more difficulties when you're trying to talk about that. So for some people, it might be, writing it down in a letter or a text message or doing something to create that bit of distance so that person has the time to process what you're telling them and think about that without that becoming so heated and difficult. So that might be one way that people might want to think about communicating this. I often think we also go into it with like expectations of how the other person is going to respond because of how they've responded before. If you're trying to advocate for your child's needs and you know that typically your parents aren't able to understand or accept that, you might go in yourself with that feeling of this is not going to go well. And so if we're going into that with a kind of tense feeling, we're likely going to create that kind of situation in there. So going in and saying, I'm coming to you because I really want to have this lovely time together at Christmas. And I know that it's going to be really tricky because we all want and need different things at that time. And I guess the phrase I would use is sharing the dilemma of how can we create something together? It not just being, okay, this is what we need. We need this, 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 and this. Sharing that dilemma of, I know this is going to be tricky. How can we work together to make this as good as possible for everyone? Just shift some of that heat sometimes.
I love that. And it feels like a much more regulated conversation as well. So we need to regulate ourselves before we have those conversations. As you say, give that person space, choose a time where there's not other pressures going on so that there's enough space to have what may be a more complex conversation. And so I think it's thinking ahead, as you were saying earlier, it feels very important here too. I think we can sometimes not want to go there. So we avoid it till the last minute and then it all becomes very heated and in the moment.
Yeah, and I guess we need to think more widely about kind of what might be going on for those people. So, if you have a neurodivergent child, you're more likely to be neurodivergent yourself, you're more likely to have neurodivergent parents yourself. So you all might have differences in your communication. I'm sure lots of people will have heard of the double empathy problem within autism, that it's both ways. It's that the neurotypical person doesn't understand how the neurodivergent person is trying to communicate, and the neurodivergent person doesn't understand how the neurotypical person is trying to communicate. And so often we go into that and we're effectively speaking different languages, right? So I guess we need to hold on to that in these interactions, that we're probably butting heads because of these differences in the way that we see things and experience the world. Or if you're someone with ADHD that might be more impulsive, you might not intend to say those things to that person. And when you're having that interaction, they might come out. And so I think it's important that we make space to acknowledge that it often isn't people's fault in these interactions, that it might not go well, but trying to, I don't know, plan a script or, like you say, plan the right time for that, hopefully will mean that that is a slightly less triggering conversation for everybody.
Yeah, that sounds really helpful. Do you think there's sometimes an idea that it's helpful to almost, we might need to mourn? There's a sort of sadness if there's something that really matters to us, and sometimes something that feels very important, it's just not possible for various reasons. And it feels like it's really important to acknowledge that actually I'm really disappointed that this aspect of something which matters to me doesn't feel like it's going to work out this time. Do you think it helps to be able to name that?
Yeah, definitely. To be able to acknowledge to ourselves why that is, because like I said earlier, if we don't, it leaks out somewhere, right? So we might hold in that idea of like, oh, I'm really disappointed that we couldn't go and see Santa have that lovely family picture because that would be too much from our child. But you don't want to say that out loud because you don't want to make the child feel like they're wrong or bad or responsible in some way for that. But actually, if we don't acknowledge that in some way, it might just be to ourselves, it might be journaling, it might be to a friend, it might be to a partner or another family member, actually acknowledging that grief for what we expected Christmas might look like or what it might be is really key to, I guess, some of that self-care, really.
Yeah, and it comes back to what you were saying about finding people who get you, because I think if you express that to another family where they have their own version of complexity and other things that perhaps haven't worked out, it will feel much more authentic to be able to say, oh, I really feel sad about this. And they could maybe respond with, oh, yeah, well, we've had to, we've adapted this and I feel sad about something else. And so it feels like you're all in it together rather than it's just us. Everyone else is doing great. And our family is somehow not living up to the rest of the world.
Yeah, definitely. Like, how can you and your tribe of other neurodivergent families, how can you like create that new normal around Christmas? How can you create what looks right to you and your families and to celebrate that together? I think, yeah, it's just beautiful.
Definitely. And I know that in your work, you do lots of adapting and thinking about how to work with families to maximize everybody's well-being. Do you have any other strategies that people could think about that might be helpful?
Yeah, thinking about people's routine around Christmas is really important because obviously everything gets like knocked out of whack, doesn't it? I think often it's a school holiday period, which for some children that's really, really great because they need that time away from school, they need that downtime. But for other children, that coming out of their routine is really tricky. And also for parents, coming out of your routine of what's safe and predictable for you in terms of maybe the time you get up or where you go or who you see or the food you eat. Can you have some sense of routine and predictability within your day-to-day life that you would have outside of that? So, if every day you eat Weetabix for breakfast, can you have that predictability around that Christmas period that it feels safe and known? I think having that safe place. So if there are lots of people coming and going into your home, can you have a safe place within your home that people can go if they need that? Or actually for you, is people coming into your space are just not feasible? Like actually is what you need to be able to go to other people's spaces for short periods of time and to be able to come back to your safe place within that. Going to other people doesn't always have to look like staying in their homes because that might be too much as well. Could it be staying in a hotel nearby rather than having to be in their space and not have a space to escape to? So I think having a safe space is really, really key. And then just generally like reducing the demands of the period. Like, do you need activities planned? Do you need to go visit 15 different family members? Like, how can we reduce the overall demands of that period just to really bring things down a little?
So it sounds like there's a whole lot of choices there that people can adapt and pick the ones that feel best for them. I really like, we were talking earlier about needs. And I think the more we can know everybody's needs and name them, even if we can't meet them exactly all the time. But I think there's something so important about learning to even be able to name our needs. There's so many people that I work with as adults who have never thought about their needs, and it just wasn't normal in their families to do that. So if we can start having these conversations with our children really early, it feels that that will help future proof them to be able to advocate for themselves, to maintain their well-being throughout life. And so it feels like a really important conversation, even when there isn't certainty about, well, we're definitely going to do this and it's definitely going to work, as much as how do we just talk about this and just start thinking about, well, creatively, which of those suggestions that you've made there might be worth us considering. So thank you so much, Lucy. I'm just going to finish by asking you for a choice space takeaway. If someone wants to make this festive season just a little bit easier for them and their neurodivergent family, and what two small choices might bring just a little more calm or connection, do you think?
Yeah, I think the number one is around acceptance of who your family is. I think that is a really key thing. This is our family, this is what we look like, this is what we do. And how can you make space for acceptance within yourself of what your family looks like? I think the other really key thing, I've been banging on about this today, but is preparation. Get ahead of the game. Don't have that surprise, that overwhelm on Christmas Day. Really kind of plan for how that's going to look like for you and your family to make it as smooth as possible.
Brilliant. I love those. And I think I would add, coming back to needs, which I've been banging on about today as well, which is just recognizing and labeling things that matter, things that are most important to all the family members, and then being creative in how we think about those. And then I would also re-emphasize that idea about finding our connection with people who lift us up and who maybe help reflect back some of the differences that actually bring that joy to life, so that we're having input from the world that supports us to be who we are, that celebrates difference.
Yeah, definitely. I entirely agree with that, Lee.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lucy. I'm sure there's loads of other things we could talk about.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much, Lee. It's been great to have this conversation, and I really hope that this helps some families to navigate what can be a lovely but really tricky period.
Thanks for listening to the Choice Space podcast. I hope this conversation has offered a little more room to pause, breathe, and find your own way forward. We've linked to all the ways you can connect with Lucy in the show notes. If today's episode has been helpful, please download, follow, and share with someone who might value the space as well. This is the final episode in season 1 of the Choice Space, and we look forward to seeing you back in January for season 2. Until then, take care and keep making space for what matters most.